You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. Well, we had heard that September the 18th was going to be the day we'd get an update on LSU running back Trey Holly and his legal situation. Trey Holly was scheduled to be in court on Wednesday, and unfortunately for Holly, for LSU, we are not yet at resolution, which means that Trey Holly's season at LSU is likely over now before it has even begun. KNOE Television in Monroe was the first to have the report, so hat tip there to KNOE. New evidence was presented in the case surrounding the shooting from back in February. One of the alleged victims, I shouldn't even say alleged victims, Keisha Cornett was shot, and she was seriously injured, told KNOE, quote, "I got shot twice in my back, I got grazed on the side of my chest, and it hit my lungs. I want him to get punished because I don't deserve this. I'm an innocent person. Thank God I am here and I'm still living." Holly's legal team, with that new evidence being presented now, with the comments from Ms. Cornett, Holly's legal team has until December the 18th to review the evidence that was submitted on Wednesday, which means this case will now last at least until December the 18th, which means Trey Holly's going to miss this entire football season. A couple things. First and foremost, this is obviously a situation where two people were injured, and this is a very serious crime that was committed, and innocent people were injured, and that obviously is so much more important than anything having to do with LSU or any football team or anything like that. So I don't want to be dismissive of that at all. So, full stop. Now, new graph. I'm not there. I don't know any of the particulars of the case. I know Trey Holly has adamantly maintained his innocence, and he'll have his day in court as the legal proceedings go on. I don't have anything further to say about that. I don't know what happened, all that transpired, so I'm not going to even speculate. This is also a sports show, so my job is to discuss how these things affect the sports team that we cover here. That would be LSU. And Trey Holly not being available now for the season is really significant. And this has got to be something, it is something that is totally unexpected by this LSU coaching staff. Remember, a year ago, they had 8 scholarship running backs. There was a big talking point all throughout fall camp. 8 scholarship running backs were so many, and Brian Kelly got asked over and over, what are you going to do with 8? And his point consistently was, generally, the cream rises, it'll work out, and it did. Logan Diggs ended up being your primary guy last year. Other guys filled roles, as we all saw. When it became clear you weren't going to have Trey Holly, it's when they sort of reassessed everything with John Emery to bring him back. And now we know what's happened. John Emery's got a torn ACL. You're down to just 3 scholarship running backs, and the hope was all along that you'd get Trey Holly back. I want to remind you, Brian Kelly, after the spring game, I mean, this was right in the press conference after the spring game, Brian Kelly was asked about Trey Holly. This is what he said.
Well, I think they're talking about, sometime in the middle of April that we could see a full resolution to this. At that time, we'll begin the process in assisting him for reinstatement, and we'll advocate for him on his behalf and welcome him back.
Remember, the shooting happened in February. Brian Kelly there after the spring game was saying they expect full resolution in mid-April. The attempted murder charges against Holly have already been dropped. What remains is illegal use of a weapon and aggravated criminal damage to property. If Trey Holly's actually the guy that pulled the trigger and shot Keisha Cornett, that's dramatically different than illegal use of a weapon and aggravated criminal damage to property. So Kelly thought in spring that Holly would be back in April, and then I, in my one-on-one with Brian Kelly at SEC Media Days, asked, and this was the middle of July, asked him for an update on Trey Holly.
The judge in that county, he had to recuse himself because of the familiarity. Because of that, they had to move the case back to next week. If it gets adjudicated next week, it should be over with next week. We're hoping that finally ends this saga.
That was July. We know what happened. It got delayed to September the 18th, which was Wednesday, and now new evidence has delayed it even further. On one hand, just from a strictly football standpoint, it's so disappointing because of Trey Holly's ability and his promise and potential. I mean, Trey Holly left Union Parish as Louisiana's all-time leader in high school rushing yardage. That's pretty incredible. And we got to see it in a flash last year against Army when he had a really great game, had that 60-yard touchdown run. And he was expected to carry a much bigger load this year, especially with the numbers being what they are, as we already discussed. And part of this whole conversation about the running back position has been, hey, just get to this point in September, because if you get Trey Holly back, then maybe he gets his feet wet against UCLA or South Alabama. You got the open date. And then when you get into October, the meat of your SEC schedule, you can start to ramp him up a little bit. Now it's very clear you're not going to have Trey Holly, barring something dramatically unforeseen in this case right now. The next time they'll be in court is the middle of December. So Trey Holly will miss this entire season, which means for LSU, in the next 2 weeks in particular, it is essential that you get Juwan Johnson more familiar with this offense. You know exactly what you have with Josh Williams. It's a 6-year player. We all know that. Caleb Jackson's in his second year, and let's just be honest. I mean, I think for many of us, Caleb Jackson was the guy we expected to take the big step this year, and it just hasn't happened so far. Through 3 weeks, Caleb Jackson sitting on less than 50 rushing yards through three games. I thought he would have had that in the opener against USC. And obviously, Caden Durham last week having the day that he did was, Caleb Jackson is at 69 rushing yards, 20 carries for 69 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. And Caden Durham having the day he did last week was awesome. He's now your leading rusher on the season with 16 through 3 games. 16 rushes for 102 yards. He's your leading rusher on the season with 102 yards through 3 games. So, yeah, I mean, you would have loved to have been able to reintroduce Trey Holly to this offense. That's not going to happen. So you've got to ramp up Juwan Johnson because you are a turned ankle away from being in a massively precarious spot and having just 2 running backs available to you. You just can't go through a season in the SEC with that little depth. The next 2 weeks, I'm not going to say it has to be a massive focus, but it has to be a focus for LSU to get Juwan Johnson reps. Remember, he has only caught passes so far. He has not taken a rushing attempt. He caught all of his targets in the game against Nichols a couple of weeks ago, and he's just got to be able to take rushing attempts at some point in the next 2 weeks. So if you need him against Ole Miss, it's not the first time he's ever carrying the football or setting up in pass protection or whatever it may be. So disappointing, precarious situation for LSU. As we continue to say, we'll let the legal situation play out as it is. But for LSU, these next 2 weeks where you are playing dramatically outmanned opponents, you've got to get these younger guys more work, and in particular, Juwan Johnson. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.